15,000 screaming fans, smoke machines roaring, pyrotechnics exploding like bombs across the Knickerbocker Arena stage. It's March 14th, 1980, and Kiss is at the peak of their Unmasked tour. The crowd is chanting, fists pumping to the thunder of drums and the scream of electric guitars. Under those blinding stage lights, wrapped in silver spandex and metallic makeup, Ace Frehley stands at center stage, his Gibson Les Paul slung across his chest. But something is terribly, dangerously wrong. Behind the Space Ace mask, behind the cool, detached rock god persona that millions worship, Paul Daniel Frehley is dying. His hands are trembling so violently he can barely grip the neck of his guitar. His vision is blurring, the 15,000 faces in front of him melting into a single mass of screaming color. And in approximately 7 minutes, during the guitar solo for Shock Me, Ace Frehley will collapse on that stage in front of everyone. What happened in Albany that night would become one of the most carefully guarded secrets in Kiss history. The official story? Technical difficulties. A shortened set. Nothing to see here, folks. But the truth, buried in tour documents, paramedic reports, and the haunted memories of crew members who were there, tells a far darker story. Before we dive deep into what really happened backstage at the Knickerbocker Arena, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel brings you the untold stories behind rock's greatest legends, the moments that never made it into the official biographies. Let's get into it. Gelishme bölümü, Bağlam inşası, Limdro 33 Zomers. To understand the Albany disaster, you need to understand where Ace Frehley was in March of 1980. Just 2 years earlier, he'd released his solo album, the only one of the 4 simultaneous Kiss solo records that went platinum. New York Groove had been a genuine hit. Ace had proven something dangerous. He didn't need the makeup. He didn't need Gene Simmons or Paul Stanley. The Space Ace could fly on his own. But success has a price, especially when you're trying to pay it with Jack Daniels and whatever pills the tour doctor is handing out. By 1980, Ace's relationship with sobriety had become a distant memory. The Unmasked album sessions had been a nightmare. Stories whispered among the crew about Ace showing up to the studio so intoxicated he couldn't tune his own guitar. About entire recording days lost because the lead guitarist was passed out in his hotel room. The tour that followed was supposed to be redemptive, a return to the arena rock glory that had made Kiss legends. But for Ace, every night was becoming a battle. Not against the music. Those came naturally. Muscle memory and raw talent carrying him through even when his mind was elsewhere. No. Ace was fighting a war against his own body, against the chemical cocktail he'd been feeding it for years, against the pressure of being Space Ace when all he wanted to be was Paul Frehley, regular, guy from the Bronx who just happened to play guitar really well. And then came Albany, March 14th, 1980. A date that should have been just another dot on a tour schedule. But backstage, hours before showtime, something was already unraveling. The dressing room at the Knickerbocker Arena was standard rock and roll accommodation. Mirrors ringed with lights, makeup stations, racks of costumes, the lingering smell of hairspray and cigarette smoke. Gene Simmons was already in full demon makeup, doing vocal warm-ups. Peter Criss, the Catman, was taping his drumsticks. Paul Stanley was reviewing the set list with the tour manager. And Ace? Ace was sitting in the corner, a bottle of Jack Daniels already half empty beside him, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The silver Space Ace makeup kit was laid out in front of him, untouched. His hands were shaking, not the minor tremor of pre-show adrenaline. This was something else, something deeper. something dangerous. Bobby, one of the longtime crew members who'd been with Kiss since the Destroyer tour, was the first to notice. He'd been setting up Ace's guitars when he glanced over and saw Ace trying to open a pill bottle. It took him almost 30 seconds, his fingers fumbling with the child-proof cap, before he finally got it open and dry-swallowed 3 pills without even looking at what they were. What Bobby didn't know, what nobody in that dressing room knew except Ace himself, was that the guitarist hadn't slept in almost 48 hours. The combination of uppers to get through the shows and downers to come back down afterward had created a chemical loop that his body couldn't break. And now, standing on the edge of another performance, something inside him was starting to crack. The pre-show meeting was tense. Paul Stanley was running through the set list, emphasizing the pyrotechnic cues, reminding everyone about timing. Gene was nodding along, professional as always. Peter looked distracted, probably already thinking about his own issues with the band. And Ace? Ace was barely present. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. When Paul asked him directly about the "Shock Me" solo, Ace just nodded, mumbled something that might have been agreement, and took another swig from a flask he'd pulled from his platform boot. Paul's jaw tightened. You could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. They were 30 minutes from showtime. 15,000 tickets sold. The show had to go on. It always had to go on. That was the Kiss way. "We're going out there in 20 minutes, Paul said, his voice hard. "I need everyone at 100%. Can you do that, Ace?" Ace looked up at him, and for just a moment, the Space Ace cool cracked. "Yeah, man, I'm fine. I'm always fine." But he wasn't fine, and everyone in that room knew it. The house lights went down. The crowd erupted, 15,000 voices screaming as one. The opening chords of Detroit Rock City exploded through the arena, and Kiss took the stage. Gene's bass was a thundering heartbeat. Peter's drums were cannons firing. Paul's rhythm guitar was tight, flawless, and Ace's lead guitar, when it came in, was off. Just slightly, a half beat behind. A note bent just a little too far. Most of the crowd didn't notice. The wall of sound, the lights, the smoke machines, the sheer spectacle of Kiss in full arena mode was overwhelming. But Paul noticed. Gene noticed. The sound engineer in the booth noticed, his hand hovering over Ace's guitar fader, ready to pull it down if things got worse. They made it through Detroit Rock City, then Deuce, then Hotter Than Hell. Ace was running on pure muscle memory now, his fingers finding the frets through sheer repetition. But he was sweating profusely, far more than the stage lights warranted. And his balance was wrong. He kept shifting his weight, stepping forward, stepping back, like he couldn't quite find solid ground. Backstage, Bobby was watching on the monitor feed, and his stomach was in knots. He'd developed an instinct for when things were about to go sideways. Right now, every instinct was screaming. The set list moved forward. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Shock Me. Shock Me was Ace's song, his composition, his vocals, his spotlight. Written after a near electrocution incident on stage in Florida, it had become one of the most anticipated moments in any Kiss show. The setup was theatrical. Ace would step forward, hit the first chord, and sing about the danger of electricity while his guitar seemed to spark and smoke. Pure rock theater, and Ace owned it. But tonight, as Ace stepped up to the microphone, his legs were rubber. The crowd couldn't see it clearly through the lights and distance. But Paul, standing 15 feet away, could see everything. He could see Ace's hand gripping the microphone stand, like it was the only thing keeping him upright, could see the way his chest was heaving. Ace opened his mouth to sing the first line, "Once was a fool who thought she loved me." But his voice cracked. Not artistically, it just cracked, broken and weak. He tried again. The words came out slurred. The crowd, caught up in the moment, probably thought it was just Ace being Ace. But on stage, Paul's expression was pure fear. Then came the guitar solo, the part where Ace was supposed to unleash, to prove why he was considered one of the great rock guitarists of his generation. He hit the first notes. They were wrong, not slightly off. Wrong. His fingers couldn't find the frets. The carefully crafted solo that he'd played hundreds of times dissolved into a mess of discordant notes. And then, right there under the spotlight, in front of 15,000 people, Ace Frehley's eyes rolled back in his head. Time does strange things in moments of crisis. For Paul Stanley, the next 5 seconds stretched into an eternity. He saw Ace's knees buckle, saw the Les Paul slip from his grip, saw his bandmate, his friend, starting to collapse. Paul was moving before conscious thought kicked in. So was Gene. They both reached Ace at almost the same moment, catching him before he hit the stage floor. The crowd was confused. Was this part of the show? The music was still playing, Peter's drums and backing tracks keeping the rhythm going, even as the center of the stage descended into chaos. "Get the lights down!" Paul was screaming into his mic. But with the stage monitor volume, the crowd noise, the tech crew couldn't hear him. "Lights down now!" Finally, someone in the booth understood. The stage lights cut to black. Emergency protocols kicked in. The house lights came up. And now the crowd could see that something was very wrong. Ace was conscious, barely. His eyes were open but unfocused. His skin, under the silver makeup, was pale, almost gray. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Paul and Gene were holding him up, trying to walk him off stage, trying to maintain some shred of dignity even as everything fell apart. Bobby was already running from the wings with the tour doctor, a man named Dr. Kleiner who'd been with Kiss for the past year. The doctor took one look at Ace, pulled out a penlight, checked his pupils, and said the words that confirmed everyone's worst fear. "We need an ambulance. Now." What happened next was controlled chaos. The tour manager grabbed the house microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical difficulties, tonight's performance is being cut short. Please exit calmly. Your tickets will be honored for a rescheduled date." Technical difficulties. The lie that would become the official story. The lie that would protect Kiss's image, protect their reputation, protect the machine that generated millions of dollars a year. But backstage, in a small room converted into a makeshift medical station, the truth was far uglier. Dr. Kleiner had Ace lying on a couch, checking his vitals, asking him questions. What had he taken? How much? When? Ace couldn't answer, or wouldn't. His speech was incoherent, fragments of words that didn't connect. His pulse was racing, 140 beats per minute. His blood pressure was dangerously elevated. All the signs pointed to a toxic cocktail of substances, alcohol mixed with pills, all layered on top of exhaustion and dehydration. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. Paul insisted on going with him to the hospital. Gene stayed behind to deal with the venue, the promoter, the inevitable questions. Peter Criss sat alone in the dressing room, still in full makeup, and didn't say a word. At Albany Memorial Hospital, in a private room secured through money and celebrity, Ace Frehley was pumped full of activated charcoal, hooked up to IV fluids, and placed under observation. The attending physician, once he'd stabilized the patient, pulled Paul aside. "Your friend is lucky to be alive. The level of intoxicants in his system. Mr. Stanley, I've worked emergency medicine for 20 years. What I'm seeing here is someone who's been engaged in sustained substance abuse for a prolonged period. This isn't a one-night mistake. This is systematic self-destruction." Paul Stanley, still in partial makeup, the star child smeared and running from sweat and stress, could only nod. He knew. They all knew. But knowing something and doing something about it are two very different things, especially when you're in the middle of a multi-million-dollar tour, especially when you're Kiss, and the show always has to go on. Ace stayed in the hospital for 3 days. The official story was food poisoning. A bad reaction to something he ate. Nobody questioned it. This was 1980. Rock stars having bad reactions was part of the territory. But inside Kiss, the Albany incident changed everything. When Ace rejoined the tour in Boston 5 days later, there were new rules. A handler assigned to monitor him. Mandatory check-ins with Dr. Kleiner before every show. Threats, veiled but real, about what would happen if there was another incident. The real question was this: why did it take nearly dying for anyone to take action? The warning signs had been there for years. The missed recording sessions, the erratic performances, the rumors among the crew. But in the Kiss organization, those signs were ignored as long as the machine kept running. Ace himself, in interviews decades later, would talk about the Albany incident in vague terms. "I had some rough nights on that tour," he'd say. The full truth, the memory of waking up in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms and Paul Stanley sitting beside him looking 10 years older, that stayed private. 2 years after Albany, Ace Frehley would leave Kiss. The official story was creative differences. The unofficial story was that the cage had finally become too small, that the pressure of being Space Ace, of maintaining the image, of serving the machine, had become unsustainable. Albany was the warning. The departure was inevitable. The night in Albany wasn't rock bottom. It was just a preview. The real story of the Albany disaster isn't about one bad night. It's about the machine that creates rock stars and then consumes them. It's about an industry that values image over humanity, revenue over health, the show over the person putting on the show. Kiss pioneered the idea of the band as brand, as larger-than-life characters that transcended mere music. But what happens to the humans inside those characters? Ace Frehley spent the 1970s building Space Ace, the cool, detached guitar hero, the silver makeup-wearing icon who could make a Les Paul scream. But Paul Daniel Frehley, the kid from the Bronx who just loved playing guitar, got lost somewhere along the way. And by March 14, 1980, he was so lost that his own body was shutting down, trying to force a break that his mind wouldn't take. Paul Stanley, in his autobiography, devotes exactly one paragraph to the Albany incident. Gene Simmons doesn't mention it at all in his various books. Peter Criss, who had his own battles with addiction and who would leave Kiss just months after Albany, talks around it, but never directly addresses what he saw. The silence is strategic. Kiss's brand is built on invincibility, on the idea that these 4 guys in makeup are superhuman, unstoppable, eternal. Admitting that one of them nearly died on stage? That doesn't fit the narrative. But the people who were there remember. Bobby, the guitar tech, left the music industry 5 years after Albany. In a rare interview in 2018, he said something profound. "I watched one of the greatest guitarists of his generation almost die because nobody wanted to admit there was a problem. Because admitting problems means stopping the tour, and the tour can't stop." Ace Frehley eventually got sober. Not in 1980, not in 1982 when he left Kiss. It took decades, multiple relapses, relationships destroyed, opportunities lost, but he got there. In a 2014 interview, Ace was asked about his lowest points. He didn't mention Albany specifically, but he said something revealing. There were nights when I shouldn't have been on stage. Nights when I was so messed up I don't even remember playing. But the show always went on, because that's what we did. The show always went on, until the night in Albany when it couldn't. The story of the Albany disaster is ultimately about the cost of fame, the price of being larger than life. Ace Frehley helped create one of the most successful brands in rock history. Kiss became an empire. But Paul Frehley almost died to maintain that empire. He survived. Many don't. But Ace's story has something many lack: an eventual recovery, a life after the makeup, a chance to be Paul Frehley again, on his own terms. Today, Ace Frehley is in his 70s, still playing guitar, still recording. He's sober. He's survived. "I don't regret the Kiss years," he said recently, "but I also don't miss them. I'm glad I survived them." The Albany disaster remains one of the most carefully guarded secrets in Kiss mythology. There are no official acknowledgments, no documentaries exploring what really happened. The brand is more important than the truth, but the truth exists in the memories of the people who were there, in the EMT reports and hospital records, and in Ace Frehley himself, who carries the memory of that night even as he's moved far beyond it. The show always goes on. That's the rule in rock and roll. But sometimes the show needs to stop. And on March 14th, 1980, in Albany, New York, it finally did. If only for a moment. If only because it had no other choice. Space Ace may have been invincible, but Paul Frehley was human. And on that night, humanity won.